The 10th season of Consider This is brought to you in part by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Saturday at 6 p.m.
Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news. Once again, from the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha, here is your host, Andrea McMaster.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this edition of Consider This. I'm Andrea McMaster. Well, February is Black History Month, so we decided this week on Consider This to highlight a special project being conducted at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, the study of the role and the history of the Black church in Nebraska. Heading up that study is Professor L.C. Manyweather Woods with the University of Nebraska at Omaha Black Studies Department.
Thank you.
Glad you could be with us.
Good to be here.
And since you're always teaching, you brought one of your students along with you too, Antonia Moore, who is helping with some of the research.
Yes.
I took one of your classes last semester, correct?
Yes.
So going to share some of what you have learned with the folks as well today. So first off, Professor Manyweather Woods, tell us a little bit about why you think why you really had this dream to study the history of the Black church.
Well, for the longest time, I've always had this as being a former pastor, but yet the history of Black people, period, has always been of interest to me, but yet specifically dealing with our religious history, that part of our country, of our nature that sometimes we are always in question of whether or not it's legitimate, authentic, or whether or not we are finding our churches to be truly authentic. You know, one of the arguments of the 1960s movement was that the Black church was not authentic Christianity, that was just a mere Black folklore. And that, of course, was the prelude to what became known as Black theology, where we had authentic Christian theology. And that based upon our heritage, based upon the history of our people, we had a dialectical relationship that was born in Africa, brought to America, and that has sustained us. And there is a need for us to examine that history of this entity that's called the church, and particularly the entity that is specifically known as the Black church, which some embrace and which some don't embrace because of their theological background and so forth.
What makes the Black church so unique? When you hear a Black church, you obviously think, well, what's the difference? Black church, white church. Right. I mean, what's the difference? So what makes it unique? Okay,
based upon, let's say, the earlier sociological teachings of the late sociologist C. Eric Lincoln, as well as E. Franklin Frazier. E. Franklin Frazier wrote the book, The Negro Church, in 1964. It was published posthumously. After Frazier, in 1977, the book was published by C. Eric Lincoln of the Black church since Frazier. The reason why the two terms, Negro and Black, was used was to talk about the time period in which we were existing. In other words, it covered the period of our political history of dealing with that of Jim Crowism, segregation. And the uniqueness was in the writings of C. Eric Lincoln, who helped us understand that because of our African heritage, there was a distinctiveness of how we interpret God, how we look at community, and how we grasp who we are in light of. In African religion, there is a connectedness with everything. In European religion, it was not. There's a dichotomous language where it's that of sacred, secular, and not understanding that there is an interconnectedness that makes us or helps us to understand that we have one creator, but yet he's manifests himself. We do have traits, characteristics, such as, for instance, there are 4 spheres of life that we call. We say the political, the social, economic, and the spiritual. Most people don't believe that we should talk. You think about what you've been taught as an American. Don't ever talk about politics. Don't ever talk about religion, because if you do, you're going to get into a world of trouble. Well, in African belief, there's a connectedness there. You cannot help but talk about all of it because you're dealing with the whole person. Mm-hmm. And what it is, that was called or deemed as partial differentiation, whereas that Europeans had a complete differentiation where they said there's no connectedness. Now, of course, that's where you see the difference between the European church of the 60s versus the church of today, because now they understand there is a connected, there you have to cross those roads, whereabout that you see that there is a interest of the people for political purposes and for economic purposes and so forth. So technically the black church has been the forerunner to what you see of the religious right. You know, Jerry Falwell was not involved as far as dealing with the life of people or the life of the concern of the poor or the life of the concern of the unborn until after 1970, after this decision of Roe versus Wade.
So when you're looking at the role of the Nebraska Black Church, what are you looking for specifically? Where do you begin?
We're looking for that same connectiveness, that same distinctiveness, which gave the pulpit a uncircumcised pulpit, meaning that no one could tell the pastor what to preach or tell him that direction. That they understood came from God. That no board could direct him. That it was a divine communication that gave him the direction, because he was the pastor. He was the one whom God had put in charge. And that the idea of people, we would not have had the civil rights movement as we did with people, such leaders as Martin King and so forth, if the black church had not existed. And I say that primarily because, you see, where many people try to determine where do black leaders come from, in the 60s, the reason why it was often the black preacher who was the leader was because he was the only one who was not under the control of the system. In other words, a black businessman still owed it to the white person. He still owed the master, no matter what, how much freedom he thought. We saw that in the movie Boycott, whereabout that in that HBO film, it showed where businessmen tried to lead, but yet they couldn't because their business would be destroyed. And just recently in the Wall Street Journal, they were talking about how black leaders were now taking over as far as certain committees was concerned. And they spoke about Senator Clyburn from South Carolina. And they talked about how he was 25 when he went to walk to get the vote, right to vote. And at age 25, what they were doing with the students, they were putting their names in the papers. Then the parents would be punished by the white owners of businesses and so forth. But this one preacher said, we're going to put your name in the paper because your father is a black preacher and he is not paid by the white man. Your mother is a black cosmetologist. Her only people that she has to worry about are black people. So she's not paid by white folk. So that's why the black preacher was there, because of the fact that he could offer the leadership. That is the distinctiveness that was strong and still remains strong and quite evident when you talk about issues, even when you talk about...
Well, you still see that today, don't you?
It's still there.
Because you still see local pastors in Omaha. We've had a lot of violence recently in the black community, and you've seen those local pastors step up and say, we need to stop this. We need to band together.
Well, I think that what it is that they have, and because they have, this is what it is that the history reflects that in a community, whereby that you do not pass on certain traditions or certain beliefs, then you're prone to fail. I think sometimes because there is a movement whereby that people are trying to say that black churches no longer need to lead or whatever the preacher needs to lead, and their efforts to show themselves the leader, then preachers generally take the path of least resistance. And what it is, because we want the community to further to be able to get along, we fail to understand that we have a specific role as a church that makes us different from other leaders in the community. Because it's not just a moral responsibility, but we have a social, a political, economic responsibility. And this is what you've seen recently as churches have begun to re-examine what others telling them that's not your business. So with the issue of the violence, many pastors now understand, they have said, this is not the same violence that we saw between 89 and 2001. These are the kids of those that we saw the violence with. So therefore, our approach must be different. And I think right now it is that leadership that will rise from the church, which will show what the difference is. The problem is that sometimes we don't have the confidence in our own history. Mm-hmm. And that's what my concern is.
Well, let's talk about some of the points, because Antonio's wondering if he's ever going to get to talk here. Let's talk about a couple of the points about actually what's going on with the study. So what are you doing? You're having some of your students go out and actually attend different churches across the...
Not necessarily attend. They are doing actual research. Antonio can share with what he found.
Okay, so you studied two churches in particular. So tell us what those churches were and what you found, what the process was like.
Certainly. A large portion of our research is digging up, if you will, historical documents, land deeds, title transfers, going back as far as we can, actually. Some of the buildings are deemed historical landmarks. We were finding out how they were originally titled. There were a couple that were, for example, Greater Bethlehem Temple. That particular location belonged to another gentleman who was white, who actually sold it to their founding pastor, Elder Foster, who went on to preach, for example, in the Omaha area, the Nebraska area, which was, for lack of a better word, revolutionary. He preached something called the Godhead Gospel, which was to tie in what had been traditionally thought of Trinity, three separate individuals, into one sacred individual with three different manifestations. So we were digging up that type of research, their doctrines. What did they feel were the responsibilities of that particular church to its community, to its members? Did it have a responsibility to those members besides preaching on Sunday morning?
And did you find that it's not just for people attending church on Sundays, but it's also the responsibility of getting really involved in the community? Have you found that has really been the case?
Some of the research that I found, I would say in general, yes, it does tend to lead that way. But when I looked at the churches that I particularly studied, when they were founded, it was much more so. Then they went through a bit of a lull, if you will, where feel-good gospel, for lack of a better word, let's just make you happy. But here in the last few years, I'd say 10, 20 years, it does appear that the black church is making a resurgence to connect back with what its founding principles were, which was, this is the right thing. This is our responsibility to step up and instruct, guide, teach, and lead our parishioners, as well as those that are a part of the community in which they belong. And so I found that actually kind of encouraging for myself.
Well, I think we should highlight maybe too is what makes a black church. Is it because you have a black pastor? Is it because 80% of the congregation is black? Because we do see so many churches today that really are multicultural. Is it because it's in a certain neighborhood? What makes it?
No, what it is that we're taking the sociological definition, which means the control and destiny of that church is in the hands of black people. That's why you can have a predominantly black congregation, but yet what it is, let's say the structure, it may be a predominantly black Catholic church, but because it's a black Catholic church, the structure though is not in the hands of those people. And this is what has made the movement of freedom and looking at freedom so different. They have been active in spite of sometimes having the prohibitions of their leaders, the state leaders and so forth, or in the case of Catholics, some who might have wanted to venture into certain things dealing with blackness. The archdiocese may say, no, you can't do that. And what it is that what every church must be careful about is that, when you look at what comprises the black church, that its control and destiny is in the hands of blacks. That's what is made, and this is another statement that Antonio has realized the black church and black community had always been perceived one in the same. It used to be said that no one ever died outside of the black community. So it did not matter to us whether a person belonged to the church or not. They were part of the community, and because they were part of the community, then that made them somebody. In the area where I was reared in Muskogee, Oklahoma, we would often have persons who were drunks or whatnot, and yet they were able to have the funeral at our church. Why? Because it was their part of dignity, that they should, where they could not have dignity in life, then definitely in death they should have dignity. It is one of those customs that were about that when the church and what Antonio, by the time he came along, in about the mid-70s, the black church and black community split. And when the split occurred, and the split occurred because of the fact of folk not understanding the church and the church not really communicating enough to understand the community.
And do you see that now coming back together?
It's slowly and definitely coming back together as people begin to recognize the worth of each other. And that what it is, we're not here to always agree on everything, but we're here to agree to disagree, but then we're here to move to the same flag. Is it not strange that during the 1960s movement, that you could have a Martin King, you could have a Malcolm X, you could have the Nation of Islam, you could have the SCLC, you could have the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and yet you could also end up with the Black Panthers. And yet in the midst of all that seemed like differences, they all had the same goal, and they understood the same principle. Malcolm and Martin, regardless of their class situation, as most folk would like to point out, they lived the American nightmare. Most of them lived the American dilemma. And when we really talk about the American dilemma, you're talking about a historical fact whereby that blacks had to live separate. That was the rule. And other groups were ending up experiencing.
And so how did it affect the church at that time?
Well,
it was a time to bonding together.
The church brought the community closer together. Is it not strange that during the period of, if we look at the period of doing the Depression and so forth of that nature, blacks were able, in other words, when we talk about Oklahoma and talk about the Dust Bowls, well, it was even worse in Oklahoma. I mean, in that time, during that period, you had a whole city, part of the city, Greenwood Avenue, Greenwood in part of Tulsa, bombed. Nobody believed that it was bombed, but it was bombed because of a woman saying a young black man had raped her. And what it is, we know the courthouse burning, the courthouse killing down here, because what it is during time of toughness and so forth, if it had not been for the church to give the voice of hope, you had movements such as Marcus Garvey and others who brought the voice of hope. Marcus Garvey's entire movement was based on the Christian symbols. A lot of folk are surprised to hear, for instance, that, and one thing I'll study is the study that we've been doing. We believe that what it was not just simply Malcolm's father who was part of Marcus Garvey movement, but we have found churches across this country, black churches across this country, was part of Marcus Garvey's movement.
Has this been an eye-opening experience for you, Antonio?
It actually has. I think one of the most enlightening things that I found was how powerful the black church of the 50s and 60s actually were. To look back and see how much they had to withstand and endure so that a person like me in today's day and time could be able to walk down a street or to attend the university even without as much difficulty. It's amazing, it's astonishing. For example, Greater Bethlehem Temple had actually had a fire in which the whole roof was missing from this building, and it was only the members that pulled together and the blacks of that community. They may not have claimed that church as their church home per se, but it was part of their community. And because of that, they pulled in, they helped to rebuild the church. So.
You hear so much, and this is across the gamut, no matter what culture you are, that the young people really aren't becoming as involved in church as they need to be, and that is critical in making a difference in our community. Do you think that, especially with some of these pastors coming out and saying, let's stop the violence in Omaha, let's band together, we need people to be on the same page and to help one another. Do you think that would make a difference if young people really were involved in the churches today?
I do, and I see more and more churches reaching out now to the young people. They're coming up with inventive ways of, for lack of a better phrase, enticing the young people. Come to the church rather than go to that club, or rather than go hang out with your friends on a street corner. Come to the church. We offer different types of music. There's now gospel rap, which for a long period of time the church refused to accept rap music as actual music. That was the devil's music. Now they've embraced it to the point where our young people like rap. We have talented individuals, black individuals, young people that enjoy that upbeat music, that strong bass, but maybe they don't have the voice for it, lyrical singing ability, but they can rhyme. They can put these raps together to express themselves. And what is the harm in that versus singing?
But this is a way that you see that churches are going to where people are at,
yes,
in order to, as we were talking about before, get people in the door.
Yes, and young people are excited about it. They're excited now about going to church. When you can hear a young person, 21, 22, say on a Friday night, where are you going? I'm heading to church right now. That's encouraging. And as a black man, it's really encouraging to me, because every time I can hear of a young black man, a young black girl going to church on a Friday or a Saturday night versus to a club, that's encouraging. That means that's that much less violence that'll be out there. There's that much more hope for upcoming generations. I'm a father, and the idea that my son may have to walk the streets someday of Omaha with the violence that's out there now, yeah, I wonder. And if the church can step up and offer at least some modicum of a solution, it's not all in the church, but it's definitely a strong starting point.
And the goal there is getting people to listen, and that's getting people in the door, and that might mean gospel rap, right?
Gospel rap, if that's what it takes, hey.
Yeah.
But then, of course, we have to, with that, is that, this is the uniqueness in Omaha. We have come up to 125 black churches in Omaha area.
Really? Wow.
So a lot of folks would say just that, that's a lot of churches, but the reality is that churches also is based upon personalities. So that means that there's a church here for everyone's personality, which is good, because then that challenges them. And what it is that regardless of whether they're black, and when we talk about the black church, we're inclusive of dealing with the Nation of Islam as well as Islam. And I say that primarily because what it is that those groups have been very active as well as addressing the needs. Sometimes people may not always see it, but yet what it is that is why when you mention the fact about, and as he stated, the black church is just a moniker, is just part of it. That's why you look for all. In other words, everyone in the 60s, they were different, but yet they had one goal. And what it is, we have to have the same goal. How we get there may not be the same, may not take the same path, but yet it should be a path that we take that be a more excellent way. Through this study, then that's the purpose of this study. The purpose of the study is for folk to understand that the role which their churches, what their churches have been through, set us example. One thing he did not mention, which was very powerful, is that the founder of Greater Bethlehem Temple put to record their belief system. It was on Old 33 and a third. And what it was, his widow gave Antonio a copy, gave him a copy. And what it is, there you have for yourself what the Greater Bethlehem Temple and that movement, the Apostolic Church, is to be about. Because, from Greater Bethlehem Temple, you have Reverend Barlow's church up on Military, all of those are apostolic churches.
And a lot of times it is, we have to get back to the heart, the reason that it got started.
You always go because that makes the difference right there. And what it is, you don't lose sight that it takes a lot of vision, it takes a lot of courage. It takes courage to go beyond the box. And what it is that all you can do is ask, you pray for strength, you pray for the courage to be different, even when folk gonna mock you. Because like what I did when I was, I'll just mention this once, I was one of the first pastors to have the church picnic when I came here in the streets. We'd block off the street. I was one of the first pastors to end up taking the parking lot and having a party with the kids, and they played their music. Did I get in trouble? Oh yeah, everybody thought I'd lost my mind. But yet the thing about it was, the police came by that night, and I'll never forget it. They said you have to turn the music down. And I guess so, no problem, but they said, thank you, Pastor, because the kids are here. And they're not always out there.
Right.
And my church is on 24th Street. So
that makes a difference. We only have a couple minutes left, so I want to make sure that you talk about that your goal really is to take this study, what you're learning, your students' research, and put it into a documentary, right?
We are doing a documentary. The good thing about it is we have, we completed last semester. We're interviewing city officials, state officials, to talk to them, what do they think about the role of the black church? We talked to the superintendent of schools, because what it is, the black church has been active in all those areas. So therefore we need to know what their role is. We hope to finish the documentary. We hope that by the end of June, we will have it done, and that'll be the first, it'll be from a unique perspective. Just want you to know, our opening song is gonna be by Marvin Gaye, What's Going On.
And what do you really want people to take away from it? We have 30 seconds left, so it's got to be quick, but what do you want people to take away?
I want people to come away with a hope, a love for knowledge of history, and a willingness to stand and let the community know that they are alive and well.
Because a lot of people say you always know that you're near a black church because you can hear the worship from blocks away, right?
The worship is still the manifesta, is that manifest.
All right, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Glad to have you both. And thank you for watching this edition of Consider This.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at unotv.unomaha.edu. If you'd like to share your comments about this show, call UNO TV at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours.
The 10th season of Consider This is brought to you in part by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Saturday at 6 p.m.